So, if you are a fearful avoidant, aka disorganized attachment style, you probably are no stranger to what it feels like to be extremely triggered. And maybe not just extremely triggered, but even triggered to the point where you do things in a relationship that you regret later, like say things you really didn't mean, or raise your voice, or really push somebody away or shut down. And if this is happening to you, you may even look back on your history of relationships and see a pattern of this happening. And when you leave that triggered state, you may feel a tremendous amount of guilt or shame and feel really upset that I wish I didn't say those things or act in that way or push somebody away in the way that I did. But there's a really important set of reasons as to why this is happening. And if you're somebody who's sitting here watching this video today or clicked here because you're sick and tired of feeling this way in relationships, feeling really triggered, feeling overwhelmed, and then feeling stuck in that emotional state that just causes you to act out of character, I hope that today you watch through this whole video so that you can really sit in the understanding of why this happens, because this won't just shed light for you on what's really taking place, but this will be sort of like a small masterclass on how to really stop feeling this way so that we stop sabotaging relationships in life in various forms, or we stop going through the cycle of feeling tremendous guilt or shame after a really intense reaction. So I really hope this will be helpful for you today. And if you stay around to the end of this video, I'm actually going to take you through an exercise that comes from one of our courses that can help you really discover exactly what your personal triggering output is. And we'll talk about how to really move through these things. So we're going to start by just talking a little bit about what a trigger is. How a trigger actually forms, what emotional and also physiological reactions are taking place. And we'll talk about some really important components that will help you understand this really deeply. Like a lot of context will probably take place here in terms of your history or past, and then how this is actually affecting you maybe way more in the present than you may be realizing. And we'll discuss the different reactions that are actually happening at a brain level. So you can start to understand, hey, this isn't like my conscious choice. When I feel this way, this isn't something that I'm choosing or I should be controlling in a way, and I'm not able to. And then we'll actually talk about some really important parts of how we can start to shift and change these things so that you don't have to feel like this in your relationships ever again, as long as you stick through this work. So, first and foremost, when you have a really big trigger, okay, just to define a trigger is basically anything that evokes a strong emotional response because it is associated with a past trauma or distressing event. Now, triggers can be sensory, so they can actually be triggered. You can actually have a trigger take place because of your olfactory senses, for example, like a certain smell. And you've probably experienced this in a more neutral way before, where you've smelled a smell and it takes you right back to like a memory you had from a very young age or from a few years ago. So triggers can be sensory, but the vast majority of the time, they are actually situational and emotional. So for example, somebody does something to you or in your presence that reminds you of something you felt really intensely in the past. And when this happens, what essentially takes place is your subconscious mind, which is actually responsible for roughly 95 to 97% of all of our beliefs and thoughts and emotions and actions. It's basically a huge warehouse of information. It basically stores everything. And so your subconscious mind, when you have something happen in front of you, digs into its filing cabinets from the past and says, okay, what are my other memories of feeling like this in the past? So, for example, I can share a personal one. So, for me, before I really worked on this big core wound of I am trapped, if somebody tried to control something that I was doing or say, hey, no, it has to be done this way, you have to do it this way, for me, I wouldn't just be experiencing the emotion of feeling like, oh, somebody's maybe violating a boundary or overstepping in this moment. What I would actually be experiencing the emotion of was, yes, that moment in front of me. But as soon as I have this experience of this uncomfortable feeling of being trapped, our subconscious mind, which is also a bit of an association making machine, goes, What are all my earlier associations of this happening? Opens the filing cabinet, floods out all of that previous emotion. And in my case, all these previous times that I felt trapped in my life, which were a lot. And all of that emotion is now flooding to the surface. So now I'm experiencing the present moment of feeling trapped combined with all of these stored emotions and experiences that my subconscious is holding essentially in its warehouse of pre-existing experiences of feeling that way. And that's why a trigger is so intense because it's not just about the now, it's the now and your combined history of previous experiences. Now, let's talk a little bit about what happens in this triggering event. So, in a triggered state, you're going to experience a wound. So, in my case, previous wounds of feeling I am trapped. Okay. This tends to be a core belief or an interpretation we've made in the past about an experience and stored. And then we experience the emotion that comes with it. So, fearful avoidants tend to experience, yes, the I am trapped core wound is a big one, but also core wounds around being betrayed or abandoned or feeling unworthy or like they are bad in some way and have to over explain themselves. So, there's the wounds, but the big emotions that fearful avoidants tend to feel the most are hurt, fear, okay, even though you cope with fear by really often over defending yourself in some way, but hurt, fear, and anger. And in fact, underneath anger are usually the emotions of hurt and fear. Usually you're not feeling anger unless you're feeling afraid first or hurt first in some kind of capacity. So, what happens at the level of the body? Well, when we are in this triggered state and the emotions arise, what's essentially happening is there's an activation of our body's fight or flight response, which is largely driven by the amygdala. And this response prepares the body to basically either confront the perceived threat or flee from it, right? The fight or the flight response. We also have freeze responses. If you've ever gone into this freeze state in your body, it can be such an uncomfortable thing to feel where your mind is racing, but it feels like everything's heavy and it's hard to really take action. Or we can also go into fawning responses. Have you ever had the experience, for example, of fawning? You people please because you feel like you're not even in your body or with yourself. Maybe you get nervous or afraid or anxious, and all of a sudden you're just people pleasing. And later it's almost like you come back into yourself. So, what is really taking place? Well, when you feel stuck in this really intense emotional state, there are actually several things happening. And then we're going to talk about what you can do so that you don't have to continuously feel like this. So, we have the activation of the amygdala. Okay. Something in front of you in your present triggers past experiences and stored associations, and everything floods to the surface, right? And so then in this particular place, what the amygdala is it's basically this almond shaped structure in the brain. And it plays an important role in processing emotions, particularly around fear and anxiety. And when you experience these overwhelming emotions, the amygdala becomes really active and then triggers this fight or flight response so that your body can then escape from the perceived threat. Now, this historically has served us for evolutionary purposes for a very, very long time, but this is not as beneficial in a sense if you're feeling really severely triggered because of something that somebody said, right? It's not like you're actually being chased by a tiger or a bear in the forest. You are in a situation instead where somebody says a comment and it deeply triggers you in a survival way that feels as if, if you actually pay attention to your body or physiology, you may feel as if you're in this really threatened space. We also have the hypothalamus, which gets activated by the amygdala, which then leads to a tremendous amount of stress hormones being released through the HPA axis. And basically, the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland to release a whole bunch of cortisol. And this is a really key stress hormone. Now, when we look at the actual implication of this, when you're really stressed, your body isn't supposed to spend sustained periods of time in fight or flight. So your body is supposed to have these, if you actually imagine back in the day, if you're, trying to survive in the wild, if you have this intense triggering event, you're supposed to have this like, shooting of cortisol and adrenaline and this big release of all of this so that you can run, you can hide, you can flee, you can react. And then your body's supposed to re-regulate. But what's really important is that if you are a fearful avoidant attachment style, what ends up happening is you have these extreme feelings like this that get triggered far too often. And this is something I really want to highlight if you are a fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidant attachment styles tend to experience a tremendous amount of these triggering events. Okay. So there usually isn't just a core wound of I am trapped. There are usually core wounds, like we talk about on this channel, of I am trapped, or I will be abandoned, or I will be betrayed, or I am unworthy, or I am bad, or I will be unloved, or not good enough, or shameful, or defective in some way, or unsafe. There's a lot of big core wounds and they're helpless if I rely on people, right? So there tends to be these big core wounds, which means if you imagine a person trying to survive in the wild, every so often they're going to encounter a threat, have this big surge of cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and then return to baseline. Whereas if you have a lot of triggers, your mind and body are doing this all the time. You may even experience being triggered multiple times throughout the day. And I want to talk to you about what this actually does. What this does is it keeps your mind and body in this state of surviving, which stops you from being able to move into a state of thriving. In fact, if you look at all of the thoughts and emotions we have throughout the day, if so much of that mental emotional real estate is taken up by trying to survive, by trying to respond to threats and wounds that release these emotions and affect you neurochemically and physiologically, and so much of your real estate is about old triggers and events and taking up that space of trying to cope with those things, then it puts you in a place where you're not able to get into a space of creating, of deciding what your life purpose is, of living your vision for your future, of really attuning to yourself. It becomes extremely counterproductive and it actually becomes really hard on your mind and body. If you're interested in helping make a huge impact on other people's lives while also building financial freedom, I'm offering an early bird 50% discount on our integrated attachment theory relationship certification program that will help you become a certified integrated attachment theory relationship coach and build your own thriving practice by the end of 12 weeks. This 12-week on-demand program will help you kickstart your new career by teaching you revolutionary tools and strategies that help clients transform their lives and relationships. Build your own coaching practice and set yourself up for a waitlist of clients and financial success. Even if you have no coaching experience, this program will give you very in-depth tools, resources, and confidence to get started in a matter of weeks. And you can learn more information by clicking the link down below. I want to do something with you as an exercise here for a moment. And I want you to sit down for a moment. And, even if you're in the middle of something, maybe you're listening to this while you're driving, it's okay if you can't sit down. You can just like sort of think of these ideas in your mind. But I want to introduce you to an acronym. Okay. This acronym is BTEA. Okay. And BTEA stands for beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. We're going to find out what yours are here today. So, beliefs means we adopt these core wounds or beliefs from past experiences. So let's say, for example, that you have parents who love you very, very much, but maybe they're very critical. Maybe they think that that's how they're preparing you for the outside world. So they may be really critical. And all those times that they're critical, you don't know as a young child, oh, they're critical because they're trying to help me for the future. This is their way of helping. Instead, you just receive the criticism and you make it mean something. So in this case, you may make it mean, I'm not good enough, okay, or I'm unworthy. So that would be a belief. And when we have a lot of repetition of these experiences, especially repetition and emotion, that's actually part of what fires and wires neural pathways that really form that belief and create that programming at a subconscious level of mind. From that belief, we have these thought patterns. You can imagine that belief being the tree trunk and the thoughts being the tree branches. And so now we think thoughts like, oh, I'm not going to be good in this job interview. I'm not smart enough. I'm not interesting enough. I'm not funny enough. All these offshoots of that core belief, I am not enough. How do we feel or emote when we believe and think these things? Right? We feel insecure, we feel afraid, we feel sad. And then something that's very interesting is neuroscience has proven, and a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio has proven that every action for our A of BTEA, every action we take is actually first sponsored by our emotional state. So even people who think they're very logical or rational thinkers are literally just making emotionally based decisions like everyone else, and then are quick to rationalize or justify their emotionally based decisions through logic. And so what's really interesting is we have this BTEA. We have this this cycle of events. Now, don't get me wrong, beliefs can automatically trigger emotions and actions. Unmet needs can also trigger emotional output and actions. That's not the only way, but it's a major way. And one of the major ones that is absolutely related to triggers here today. So we have this BTEA, beliefs to thoughts to emotions to actions, that's happening very fast. And our actions are the way we actually cope with those pre existing beliefs. So, what you may experience, for example, is that you have an action where you yell because you're first believing, I'm about to be abandoned and betrayed. And so you are coping in an extreme way from that. Remember, not just in this moment, whatever's happening in front of you, but also because of all of the pre existing times that you were made to feel like that in the past. And if you are a fearful avoidant attachment style, you know this probably isn't, something that happened a couple of times. This is probably something you experience on many, many occasions in various forms. And so another example could be that you believe that you're unworthy. And so you start thinking thoughts about that. You start thinking of all the ways that you're not going to earn your worth or be worthy of a relationship you're in, and you feel sad or hurt or afraid. And then from that, you may shut down or you may cling really intensely instead, right? You may find that you have an activating response for your A of action or a deactivating response to shut down. It can go either way. It's basically the way that you've adapted to that experience, how you've learned to cope because of that. And so, from this BTEA dynamic, we have a lot of pain and can often feel like we're stuck in this frozen state in our body where we can't seem to get rid of those emotions. We can't seem to actually shake those emotions away. And you may even find that you sit in that for many, many minutes, maybe hours, maybe even a couple of days at times. So I'm going to put a part 2 of this video into how we can get out of this space, because I recognize this is already a pretty long video. I also want to let you know that we have a course that you can check out fully for free that's all about how to actually reprogram these limiting beliefs at that BT level. But what I want you to be able to do here for a moment is write out what yours are. Try to follow your BTEAs. Try to write out, what big wounds or beliefs do I have? How do I tend to think about these things? What do I feel, or how do I emote when I'm feeling this way? And what actions do I take accordingly? Okay. So let's do one together as an example. Let's say you have a belief, I'm going to be abandoned. So then you start thinking thoughts about, look, they're pulling away, the relationship might end. I don't know if is this gonna work long term? I'm just gonna get hurt by this person when they leave. And then how do you feel? You feel sad, you feel hurt, you feel, stressed, afraid. And then how do you act when you're feeling this way? And that's where you may find yourself in a position where you act in a way that shuts down. You may instead act in a way that holds on. You may find yourself clinging or pushing away, because fearful avoidance have both sides in that attachment continuum. So try to recognize what yours are, and then stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where we are going to talk about how to heal these things, how to actually change our BTEAs. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you don't want to miss any more like this, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.